Welcome everyone to the Tulsa.net user group. Tonight, we're going to talk about .NET Aspire. Now, this was supposed to be with Scott Hunter, but he had an engagement that popped up. So we have a great pitch hitter, Glenn Condron of Microsoft, that is on the .NET team. He's going to help out with talking about .NET Aspire, a great hot topic. And I got to tell you, this is really catching fire because this is I've already known some people using this and doing more than just proof of concept stuff out of this, and they are running with it and absolutely loving it. So Glenn, I'm going to hand this to you. I'll let you do your intro and then take away from there.
Sure thing. Hello, I'm Glenn. So I am the product management lead for the .NET platform, which effectively means anything that is not MAUI or kind of tooling falls under my team. So Dan Roth, who you had on here a little while ago, ultimately reports to me and a bunch of other stuff. So ASP.NET Core, EF and the data and security, and Aspire in this case is one of the things I was heavily involved in. I also, when I was an IC all the way through till now, I've been involved in the cloud native space. So I'm probably more involved with Aspire and our cloud native stuff than some of the other things that are under my portfolio. But that's my part of the world. There are effectively two halves to the product management team, and I'm one half of them. Is my current spot on the .NET team. And I guess historically wise, I've been working on this stuff since we created this thing called Project K, which ultimately became .NET Core. So I've been working on Core since before it was called Core. Before that, for a little bit, I worked on the Entity Framework team as an ICPM when I first joined Microsoft. So that is me. I can't really see the chat, unfortunately. I am in Australia right now, so don't worry. Tomorrow is going to be fine because it is already tomorrow here. And but it also means for those of you who are on the call, I can't really see the chat and such because I just have the one laptop monitor, and so I'll bet Sean's going to interrupt and stuff. Once we get to the end, though, I'll definitely interact a lot more. But in the short term, probably won't be able to see what's going on. Okay, is that good enough, Sean? How was that? Sound good?
Yes, that was awesome. And we already have a question come in that says, where can we get that template? So
which template? This one right here? This .NET Aspire starter template?
Yes, I believe so.
Right. .NET workload install Aspire is how you get this template. So if you Google for how to get started with Aspire, you'll see there are some instructions, definitely instructions on the repo. I believe we also have just instructions in the actual docs now, but there is an Aspire workload, much like MAUI is a workload. And when you get that workload, it has these templates in it. So the .NET Aspire application is just the Aspire stuff. And I'll just create this, and then there's a couple of templates for Aspire. There's a couple of ways to get going with Aspire. We have a few. Right, as you can see here, we basically give you the options to create all the different independent components. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create this starter app, and I'm just going to spend a bunch of time tonight running through everything that you get. And I'll also talk, since you asked that question, I'll also refer back to which subsets of the starter template come with the other templates that you get. Because there's a pack of a few of them. Yeah, that's what I'll do. So firstly, using .NET 8, what this checkbox does is basically this is the only real option for the starter app. It's whether or not it by default already has a output cache already configured with Redis. And so we're going to leave that checked, which obviously does mean you need Docker to make this run, because Docker is the thing that is on your local machine is going to spin up that Redis container to be able to fulfill that cache requirement. So there is no actual hard dependency on Docker in Aspire, but just so many of the features require you to spin up a container that it becomes a requirement fairly quickly as the local runner of containers. So the Aspire starter template, let's dive straight in. What it gives you is, so the web here is just a Blazor app. It's almost exactly the same as Follow Me Blazor, which you would have seen if you watched Dan Roth, I assume. Then it also gives you this API service, which is a straight up API, which just returns some weather. And then it has these new things. So this is an app host, and then there is this service defaults, and we'll talk about both of these. So if you don't create the starter, if you just create an Aspire app in Visual Studio, you only get the app host and the service defaults. You don't get any projects that the app host is supposed to start. And so is the difference. And then there's also a template to just give you the app host and just give you the service defaults. That's what that set of templates are for. The other way that you can get started with Aspire is from an existing Blazor app. You can right click and say add, and then in here it has, you can add .NET Aspire orchestration support, which will add the app host projects. You can also add an Aspire component, which adds a NuGet package, but we'll get into that in a minute. So they're like kind of multiple entry points to be able to get this stuff into a project. Aspire does have, we do try to make sure that this thing can work with existing projects. And so let's do, I guess, first of all, let's do a whirlwind tour of this. Now, let me, how do I make this thing not be pinned to the top of my screen? Just to press F5. So firstly, let's press F5. And then what happens here is, so with an Aspire app, you set, as you can see over here in Visual, as you might have seen, the app host is the default, is the launch project. So what happens is the app host starts up, and then anything that you told the app host to do will then run. And so the default experience for an Aspire solution is when I run it, the app host starts, and then once the app host does start, it'll go and launch all the dependencies. So and then launch the Aspire dashboard. And so that was a little bit slow, mostly because Docker and everything was asleep on this machine. But so F5, you get this dashboard. Yours might look exactly the same as this. I'm pretty sure I'm using Preview 4 bits, and I don't think Preview 3 has even come out yet, or if it did, it only just came out. So your dashboard might not look exactly like this when you start it up, but the point is that you'll have a dashboard. It'll show you all of the bits and pieces of your application. So in this case, just running my app, just pressing F5 on this app has started a Docker container that is running Redis. It has started the API project. It has started the web project. I can go browse to the web project and I can navigate around and do stuff. And it has set me up for all my logs for each of those apps exists in here. For each of those component parts of my app exist in here. We have structured logging, so you can filter and like find bits and pieces in your logs. And also probably one of the most amazing parts of this is distributed tracing built in by default. So this shows me how long each of the requests that have been made to the web app have taken. And also if I view it, you can actually see the breakdown of each of the segments of this request. So when I clicked on that weather page a minute ago, it hit the browser link is turned on because I'm using Visual Studio. It then said, did it get against Redis for some reason, which we can talk about in a minute. Then it did a HTTP request to the backend API service, which is this blue bar. Then it came back and then it did a set in Redis. And you can probably figure out why all of that was, but then this gives you this view of being able to see exactly what was going on. There are some details in here. You can see the actual request data that was made. You can also, over here, you can also see details of each of the instances of the application. You can see things like what environment variables were set when we launched that app in order to be able to make it run. So for example, on my web front end, when I go in here, I can see things like all of the telemetry exporter information, as well as like things like the URLs for the other parts of the application that I've launched. So this tells you how effectively we configured everything. And then, so then I guess lastly, just to give you the last tour, is you can also see metrics. So down in here, I can go and see, different what's been happening in my application as the application is running. I can see these are metrics that exist in .NET. You can get access to these. None of this information that I'm showing you here is new. You've been able to get all of this information. What we did was put it all together, give you the UI over the top of it, and make sure that it was consumable and easy to run. But none of these metrics, for example, are new. Actually, that might not be true. We may have added some metrics in 8, but you can see them going on here. The point of all of this is to give you, we call this the developer dashboard. So the point of all of that is we wanted you, when pressing F5 on your like Aspire application, to give you all the information you might need to figure out what is going on. That all makes sense, right? So that's the developer dashboard and the kind of overall experience for what happens when you run and what all the pieces are. So let's talk a little bit more about my application. So what I've got here is this Aspire web app. It's just a Blazor app. It's a straight up file new Blazor app with a couple of chain differences. So the main difference is it has this method called add service defaults. And as you can see, it says add Redis output cache here. And it says use output cache. So that's why when we saw in that distributed trace, it was doing a get against Redis and then a set, because what the web front end does in this app is it, not that page, the weather page. The weather page here has this output cache attribute, which means that Blazor automatically caches the generated HTML for this page in Redis for 5 seconds, I think that is. And then any future requests to the app don't actually execute any of this code. They just return the cache data from the Redis instance. And so this application has done that, and it's given this string cache, right? So it's saying, I'm going to use output Redis cache, and the connection name is cache, right? But so normally, I guess if you were going to do this without Aspire, you would be like, okay, well, now I need a Redis container running. How am I going to do that? You might come in here, maybe you like put a connection string in here and you would figure some stuff out. One of the things you'll notice is I have completion in this file at the moment, which actually means that this thing, the Aspire knows all of the config options for Redis. So I can actually turn config on and off here, which is a feature of this. We could go into detail on how that works if you want. But normally I might make up a string connection string. Then I would have to figure out how to run Redis locally, probably do a Docker spin up Redis or install Redis, then set the connection string in here to whatever the port I'm running that thing on is. Then that's going to be different on everybody's machine probably, and then so you deal with all those differences and so on and so forth. So what happens with Aspire is over here in the app host, I've just said I need a cache called Redis. I've needed a cache. I'm going to say add Redis. So we have this method, and what that add Redis does is tells this app model, okay, there needs to be a Redis instance, and the default way of us doing Redis is to give you is to spin up a local container. You can also do this kind of stuff by pointing it at a remote Redis or something like that, but the default experience we always show you is kind of trying to do locally and then move to more hosted stuff in prod. Then we add the back end, but then what's continuing on this for the Redis thing though, then down here, if this is we say web front end, you have a reference to the cache. So the web front end knows it needs to be able to talk to this cache. And this is all of the Aspire host. And so these three kind of lines are enough to tell Aspire when it launches to spin up Redis, spin up the web app, spin up the backend API, and also set all of the config information up so that the web front end has the connection string to the Redis cache, and the web front end has a connection if the URL for the API service, so that when you F5, it just works. We'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. I see some chats going past, so feel free to, but I can see the little red 6, but I can't tell you what they're saying. So if there's a question, I can pause if you'd like.
No, not questions just at the moment. They're talking about the app settings schema.json. Yeah. So the packages that okay, let's talk about that for a little bit. So this is a generic, so when we talk about Aspire, we tend to call it a stack, an opinionated stack, things like that. The reason for that is it's the sum of its parts is the whole is kind of greater than the sum of the parts when you put it all together, but all of the parts are very individually useful even on their own. And so one of the features we developed in order to make this experience that we wanted was this ability to put files into to put files. I don't actually know. I've never actually tried to do this. Does it show me in here? Can I see the thing? It doesn't look like it. Yeah. Was to create an ability to put these manifest files into the packages, which it doesn't look like you can actually find it. So, but the way this works is the Aspire. In order to get the output cache, didn't just depend upon output caching or even Redis
output caching. I depended upon Aspire output caching. The reason for that is Aspire has as part of it what we call the components or a component spec. And so that spec has a set of guidelines for what it means to be an Aspire component. So if you're going to depend upon an Aspire component, it means a set of things. The things that means is it's going to be configured for DI for you in the right way. Like it's going to be a singleton or a transient or whatever. By the thing, I mean the SDK that Aspire component is part of. So in this case, we don't wrap the Redis Stack Exchange Redis. You still just consume Stack Exchange Redis as you normally would if you added just vanilla Redis here instead of the output caching abstraction. But there's an Aspire method which adds it to DI, uses the right lifetime. It configures it for health checks, and it configures default resiliency policies with Poly, given a basic but reasonably good set of default retries and circuit breakers and such. Like it has a good policy set up by default. It has a manifest file, basically a schema file that comes with the package, which now the Visual Studio and friends know how to find in order to be able to give you this completion in here. Then those are all things that if you're going to be an Aspire component, you have to have, basically. And so we have a set of those requirements for what it means to be an Aspire component. Because when we were deciding to work on Aspire, I was going and doing a bunch of interviews to a bunch of people. It looks like I just got a warning that my connection is unstable, so let me know if I need to pause. We were doing a lot of interviews with people, and we kept getting this kind of recurring, maybe I'll turn that off. We keep getting this theme of feedback, which was effectively, I don't know if these things, it's not that I'm using a whole bunch of packages. I don't know if they're supposed to go together. I don't know if they're supposed to be used for cloud native. I don't know if I'm doing this the right way. And I would really love even if for some of the things that I can consume, I could get more confident that I know this stuff works for like building cloud apps, and it could get me started faster. Because when we were first pitching the idea of Aspire internally, Damien Edwards put together this slide, and it had on the left-hand side, it had basically all of the steps you would need to add a Redis, to just use Redis in your app. So you needed to add Redis, you need to add the Stack Exchange Redis project. And then along with all of our guidance, right? So if you did like best practices effectively, you needed to add the Redis package, figure out that a health checks package existed, add that, it was a completely separate package, turn on health checks, like do that wire up. You needed to know to set up Poly. You needed to shim the config, all of the conf, you needed to shim Stack Exchange Redis to be able to do OpenTelemetry if you were trying to use OpenTelemetry. And you needed to know the lifetime. You needed to know how thread safe the Stack Exchange Redis SDK library was, so that you could add it to DI in the right way. What else? And you needed to get Redis running, right? So like it had this big set of steps, and we were like, this is the kind of burden that even the simplest task lands on average developer in front of a computer. Can we try and satisfy some of that? And that was what our goal was with components, was to try to just fix some of that, so you could just depend upon it, rely on it a little bit, give yourself a little bit of a higher level of abstraction with some guarantees. Anyway, so that's I mean, a brief tangent, but it's all stuff to talk about. And so when you when you right click here and you say add now on a project, you'll see this add Aspire component. And effectively, this is just a filter over NuGet packages to only return you packages that are Aspire components, which means you know that they are all implementing that spec that we had earlier. Yeah, so that's the way all of that works. So the other thing is there is this service defaults project. So in service defaults, and this is called in each of the kind of Aspire apps. This is where we knew we needed to be opinionated about, like, you're going to use OpenTelemetry, you're going to use health checks, you're going to use service discovery, you're going to use the default resiliency handlers like this method just here, and so on and so forth. And as well as like what all things are that we're going to log, which instrumentation are we going to use and such. We knew that we needed to give you that. We also knew some people were going to have opinions about how that worked, even if it was just as trivial as what the health endpoint was going to be by default. And so we wanted to give you a way to get you started with all of that, bootstrap it into your application, but not bury it too much. Like if we just put it behind a method, it can get very annoying to try and completely change. And so we basically ended up falling back on, okay, we're just going to create a project and we're going to put a bunch of code in here that you call, and you can feel free to tweak it. The idea with this service defaults is this is where you would set up kind of config you want every single service in your solution to be the same on. So like everybody's going to be using OpenTelemetry because that's the standard we're configuring. Everybody's going to use health checks, so on and so forth, right? They can be tweaked independently in each other thing, but the point here is to provide that kind of standard setup.
So we got a question on that.
Question?
Yeah. Will it be possible to add the service default project without also adding the orchestrator project?
Yes, it has its own template. Yep. So yes.
There you go. Okay. And let me tag on with that one. Are there guidelines or a spec that library authors can follow to Aspire enable their libraries?
Yes, there is. So there's actually a lot of debate about this at the moment. The question is, so the answer to that is yes, there is a big document that we have because we needed to do it for ourselves to create all the Aspire components that we launch with. We intend to turn that into a big, almost RFCE kind of like guidance. But there is some debate at the moment, and the debate is still revolves around. So the way we did Aspire components is we created a new package that depended upon the existing package, and then you reference the new package, and it just has a small amount of stuff in it. It has maybe the schema if you don't push that down, but it has the config and the logic. The question is is everybody going to do that, or should you be able to just put a stamp on your package to say, yeah, it is now an Aspire component because it honors all the guidelines? And I'm not 100% sure, and so we haven't yet locked down what the guidance for all that would be. Some people really like the idea of having it as its own layer of packages. Other people think that's the stupidest thing in the world because it causes an explosion of packages for no reason. So some of that is still kind of being talked about a bunch. You can go and throw in your opinions into the repo if you want. But the short answer to your question is yes, there is already and will be continuing to evolve guidance on how to become an Aspire component. And we do expect people out in the ecosystem to be able to create Aspire components and have them appear when you say add Aspire component and honor the thing. We're still figuring out the details of what that looks like. What would the governance be for who decides what an Aspire component is and stuff like that. We still got to figure out all the details of how we want that to operate. But yeah, but yes, we expect that to be the case.
Awesome. And then we got one more question. For those who are not great with Docker, and just because they've been working on other things, etc. How much configuration does one person need to do beyond just installing Docker? Would they need for an Aspire app? None? How cool is that?
None. So I am using Docker right now to run that Redis cache, but as you can see, I have no Docker. In a minute, I'm going to run the command to deploy this to Azure, which means I'm going to generate Docker images for all the parts of my app, but I don't have a Docker file anywhere.
Awesome.
And might that actually ever type the word Docker?
Oh, that's awesome. Are you also going to like show how quickly you can add a database?
Yeah, I could probably do that. Yeah. But I could add Postgres or something here and show you. Yeah. But I mean, the answer to that though is this is how I add a new line here that says add Postgres, and then I do a reference Postgres, and then suddenly I've got a Postgres. Is actually how that works.
Nice.
So yeah, I can do that. But actually, do I already have the package? Oh, look at that. I do. And then I'm pretty sure that, and then if I run, now I've never actually ran Postgres on this computer, so I believe this will take a minute, and it's going to try and download the Postgres Docker image and run it on my machine whilst I'm in a call on Australian internet, which is probably a horrible idea. But what will happen now is when this starts, you can see it's already started this Postgres latest Docker database called Hey. And it's starting now, which means that it's doing the Docker pull right now and doing the download of the Postgres database. So this is how complicated it was to get a new database Docker image running on my machine. And
That is amazing.
then, yeah, okay, well, are you ready? If you think that's good,
Absolutely.
hold on to your hat. Right. So let's do this then. Dot. Let's try and pretend like I know what code is. Dot. Commander, I think. Yes. Look, with Redis Commander. And then I don't remember what the name of this one is. So I guess I'll like use IntelliSense to figure it out, like everybody. Do that. Okay, what's that going to do, Sean? Pop quiz.
Oh, I'm the wrong person to ask about Postgres.
Yeah. So this is new. What did I? This is a new thing. I don't know if this is probably taxing my system a little bit too much doing all of this now, but what this does is when this starts up, Redis Commander is a web-based like admin dashboard for Redis. So now what happens is, as well as having Redis running, I have a Redis admin. So I could like look at the database, I could add keys, I could delete keys, I could do whatever I need to with the contents of my Redis dashboard. PG admin is the same thing for Postgres. So this has added a database to my application called Hey, yes, but it has also created, it is also going to download and spin up the Postgres admin web app, which sits beside the Postgres database. And when I click it, it's going to give me full access to all the tables and the schema and the queries and everything running inside that Postgres database, so that I just have, effectively SQL like Management Studio running beside my app when I press F5.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that.
Cool. So this is starting because I haven't done Postgres, so it's going to have to download it. Is why this is taking a little bit. It's going to download the Docker image. Yeah.
And right now, as far as those Docker
questions,
images,
I can see more coming in. So
it's okay. As far as the Docker images, right now, without anything being expressed, it's pulling the latest, I assume. Is there a way to specify a specific version?
There is. You can start to control it more manually inside that app host project. We try to give you like good defaults, so that it pulls latest. But yeah, you can customize that sort of stuff in here to be able to control it. Yep. I think you can also say add container and give it just a container name at a minimum as well. If you need to just to not have the convenience methods, you can always fall back to kind of basics or spin up your own container that you published yourself, for example. Right. So yeah, that's that. PG admin is obviously a beast, taking a while to go spin up, but I think it's impactful when you can actually see all that stuff appear. So yes, so you can customize that a little bit, and at a bare minimum, if worse comes to it, you could just drop out of the like with add Postgres convenience method and say add container and go back to basics. Right? Yeah, cool. Other questions while I'm paused?
Oh, there's actually there's a stack of questions coming up. Can it generate a Docker file for the SAST
generate a
scanners?
Docker file? Oh, interesting. Okay. Let me think. Does that? I believe. That's an interesting question. So that's a good question. And so yes, there is a way to get a Docker file, right? But okay, look, PG admin has finally started. Thank you. Yes, there's a way to get a Docker file. And it looks like it's not actually working. So good job, PHP. Good job, Postgres. I guess. I don't know. Yes, you can get a Docker file.
His machine finally hit its limit.
That or the internet connection. I think the questions from Jeremy kind of did us in. Yeah, he's over in Australia. In fact, I don't even know which part of Australia, but I'll try to ask him here in a bit.
His internet's doing like mine, randomly, just disappears.
Yeah.
Gotta go out and start
And the
fire
internet in
somewhere.
Australia is famously awful. So yeah.
All
Here,
right.
I thought he had
remember what-
Xfinity.
All right. I wonder if he's gonna probably maybe even go far as to reboot and reconnect or something. So we'll give him just a minute or so. And I really appreciate all the questions coming in, and I will try to ask as much as I can. And leave it to Jeremy to ask a great question that I guess they haven't dealt with just yet, but dealing with the scanners. I think that's supply chain scanning. I think that's a good idea. All right, let's see. Is it possible to use a specific version of a Docker image? Yes. I think you just covered that. Let's see. I was going to ask about adding a mount persistent Postgres data, but I saw a method pop up in the IntelliSense. Yeah, there is a way of doing that. It is in the IntelliSense that can help handle with all of that connection. And how did you, let's see, what was it? How can you tell the app where the Postgres container is? I think that's done by reference name. I wanted him to clarify that, but I believe it's by reference name.
My guess is towards the question of the Docker file. He's going to point out that built into the .NET SDK, it can automatically generate a container. And that actually doesn't use a Docker file. It actually uses a self-contained image that gets dumped into a chiseled image. That there's some voodoo there. The cool and annoying part, though, is that your app now no longer gets built in the container. It gets built on your machine and then stuffed into your container. But that's their current opinion. And so I suspect the Docker file is going to work like that. The resulting thing is there is no Docker file. Just a guess.
Hello,
Yeah.
apologies.
Hey, back.
I'm assuming that was all user error. And I do know that I talked to y'all for at least a little bit before I realized that I had completely disconnected myself from the call.
It's all right.
Somehow.
That's it. We were just covering a couple of questions, and
I heard the tail end of, yeah. I heard the tail end of what you were saying, and like I suspect most of what you said was right. What I was saying about the Docker file is that there's definitely ways to generate the Docker file, yeah, but all of them are kind of optimized around this idea that you kind of want the Docker file to opt out of the like automatic thing, whereas you're kind of after I kind of want an ephemeral Docker file to be able to just do for scanners, right? Yeah, you see my screen again now?
yes.
We
and
can.
there's- So
One question we couldn't answer while
Cool.
you were gone.
Um,
How do I tell my API where the Postgres database is?
Yeah. So in here, when I said add project with reference cache, that's what does that. So if my API was to use this Postgres database, I would say dot with. I guess this might not actually be the answer to your question now. Actually, as I go, but I'll go to what the answer and what you might have actually been asking in a minute. So. You use references here to say like give it the actual thing that you're going to use, right? And this tells Aspire so it knows enough to set up the things. And then in when you add the Redis when you add like the Postgres Aspire component to your API service, in here you'll have a builder dot add Postgres where you'll give it the string, in this case hey, the name, and that will add the Postgres client, the default Postgres client to DI, and the connection string will be set up via, I think it's environment variables by default on your local machine, and then when you deploy it, it depends on where you're deploying to and what service discovery system you're going to use. Does that make sense? I could probably run through it, assuming adding a dependency likes. I just suspect what will happen is, yeah.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. That's brilliant.
Makes sense. Cool. Yeah, I think the problem is that maybe here. I have, if any of you have tried to use preview bits of our stuff before, that's what this problem is, and I haven't tried to resolve it, which is why I can't really add the the Postgres package. Although I could figure it out if you really want to see it work. I think what you said was, it broke up a bit at the end, but I think what you said was, yeah, that makes total sense. But I don't know if you had a question after that, so I'm going to pause now so that hopefully you can answer. Cool.
All right. Rob, did that answer your question for you?
All right.
Yes, it
All
did.
right. Okay, cool. We got another
Awesome.
question is, can we
Yeah.
run more than one instance of, say, the same app service image as a different container on a different port and or environment variables?
Yeah, you're just going to give it a different name. Right.
Okay.
So when I run this, you'll see, when I ran this, you would have seen that if you might not have noticed, I guess I could run it again. The name is in the K name, the word cache and the word hey is in the like Docker names, the Docker like run names and a bunch of stuff like that. And it's in the environment variable keys. So you can run multiple instances of Postgres or multiple instances of your app, but you'll need to give them different, multiple instances of your dependencies, you need to give different names. The ability to spin up multiple instances of your services is interesting, and it is a feature of Thai. One of the things that this kind of replaces, and what I can't remember is if we Fisher yet. I think we did, but I don't remember. I don't remember if it works yet. Yeah, with replicas, right? And so 5, right? And so, I believe now when I run, I'll get 5 of my web front end, and I could do it with replicas, I believe, of my dependencies. But what that's going to do is kind of, who knows? Depends on your thing. Like, yeah. So now you have a bunch of instances of your web front end with all the different ports set up. They're all configured to talk to the same backend. That answer your question?
Yeah, that is awesome. That is great.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
No problems.
All right, we're caught up on
That's
questions.
all, caught up on questions. All right. Okay. Where was I at? Okay. Well, I guess this won't work, but this won't actually probably work on this machine. But since we're here, let's try it. So one of the things is, we talked about the Docker container stuff. So I guess I'll do this now as a demo. So one of the things you can do with AZD. So this isn't a feature of Aspire. What I'm showing you from here is a feature of Azure Developer CLI, because it knows about Aspire, right? And so if any of you are like AWS fans, AWS needs to do the work to make this same experience work for them. But Aspire, what Aspire does is it has the concept of a manifest. Today, at least, it works via a manifest file. Aspire can generate a manifest that describes everything that the app host knows about your app. We didn't want to turn Aspire immediately into Terraform, and so we knew we didn't want to fill the app host project with a lot of production concerns where this thing is going to go, because there's just a whole lot of stuff you need for that you don't care about on your developer machine. And we wanted this hyper focused on the developer experience and what developers needed while sitting at a keyboard. And so what we did was say, so we're going to focus on that, but we're going to make it so that we can get that information in a consumable form into the next tool chain, so that the next tool chain can pick it up from there and take it however it decides to do it. So when using AZD, you can come in here and say AZD init. It'll scan the current directory for code, and it can detect that this is an Aspire app, and it can create, so you can see here it says .NET Aspire in my terminal. So yeah, I know that. I can choose which of these apps it's going are exposed to the internet versus not. Sorry, the default experience with AZD is it takes you to container apps. There is a Kubernetes, there's an open source project called Aspire 8, the letter number 8, that will take you to Kubernetes. I believe the AWS folks are working on some maybe the AWS stuff, but this is the AZD container apps experience, which is kind of the most like easy button way to get into the cloud possible. So what happens here is Environment name, I mean Glenn Hunter, right? And then, oh, look at that! I'm my thing here is my hacked up Postgres thing here is messing with my thing. So let's get rid of that for now. And then, do I do AZD init again? Let me see.
All right. When you get a chance, we got a couple other questions.
Oh, okay, cool. Let me. I have to.
End of
Yeah, you
line
can ask
6.
your questions while I figure out what I broke on line 6. Did I? Oh, did I? Look at
A
that.
semicolon.
End of line 6. Scroll across because I have this thing. Look at that. I even have a semicolon on my hat for just occasions such as these, which you can't see, but I have a little semicolon pin. Given how frequently I forget them. Yeah, go for your question.
Okay. All right. Let's see. If these are bundled together, how would we ensure only one of these would be deployed in an update? For example, or for instance, say I only update the API service. I wouldn't want to redeploy everything. Is this something built in?
Yeah. So that is mostly okay. I'm gonna have to, because this looks like I've hit an annoyance in the way AZD is set up, where it doesn't know how to like fix this. So we're going to do the right thing and delete everything that it generated and start again, right? So actually, I guess here's an interesting tangent, and I'll come back to your question in a sec, is what AZD and init and stuff does is it creates a bunch of config files and that have information about what you set up in the CLI that you can then go tweak. And then when deploying, what it does is take that information and use Bicep to then deploy the application and create all the resources that are required to be able to deploy the thing. So I believe just deleting that .azure file is enough to basically put me back into a clean state and I can start again. To answer your question, mostly the deployment experience is container-based. So we build Docker images. The Docker toolchain in general is smart enough to know that, so now AZD up. So this gives me this Azure YAML file with config. It gives me this next step.mb that describes what's going on. And then if you would do AZD up, at this point, this is going to say what's changed. It can detect whether any changes. It's safe basically to run a deploy against the entire project. It'll know what has changed and what hasn't changed. It knows if Docker images are exactly the same as the previous Docker image built or not. Therefore, it knows what to push, and the deployment process is smart enough to know that as well. East US 2, when I'm in Australia, probably is not the best option. Hopefully there's an Australia region in here. Australia East, I am on the east of Australia. Southeast? I don't think so. It depends on where Southeast is, but we'll try Australia East. Pretty sure this time's out. It has every time I've tried it from here. There's a 100-second timeout on HTTP client that is not exposed to the users, which is unfortunate. But what this does, though, is it creates the app in Azure Container Apps environment, because if it doesn't exist, and you can see that the output of it here is going to do it. It's going to create the cache. It's going to use the Azure Container Apps has a Redis extension, so it can just say Container Apps add Redis, and it takes care of that. I believe today that's by running a container in the Container Apps, but eventually it'll probably be managed Redis that gets kind of injected into your Container App environment. It builds Docker images for each of your projects, pushes them, and then does Azure Container App deploy, which is kind of a rolling update to the Container App instances that are running in the Container Apps instance, and all without Docker and Docker files. To go back to that question earlier of like how much Docker do I need to know? So .NET. So this is another example of it being a stack. .NET knows how to generate Docker images from a .NET project without you doing anything. You can just say .NET build my project as a Docker image, and it will do it. And you can either save that image as files, as tarballs, or you can just get them generated into a Docker host and then do a push or whatever you want to do. So people kept saying Docker is the unit of deployment for the cloud. And when people were saying that, and it appears to be true, my statement was, well, that means .NET should just be able to do it, same as it can generate MSIs or like whatever, right? And so .NET is capable of doing that. You can do stuff like come in here to you can do stuff like you can put image information in here. I can't remember the actual name, but you can put in here, you can put elements that tell .NET what Docker images is the base for your project, for example. You can start to customize how the Docker image is built, the big stuff at least, without ever learning the Docker file syntax. Or you could put a Docker file in here and go nuts with Docker if you really want. But that's kind of a generic .NET feature. This takes advantage of it. You can see the whole experience is kind of taking advantage of all these unique pieces and putting it together. Because the .NET SDK natively can produce Docker images. This takes advantage of it. Azure Container Apps knows how to add Redis. This is taking advantage of that, and so on and so forth. And so the amazing bit here, I guess, that I'll call out is I have never, if it didn't time out because of my network, I would have an Azure app, a Blazor app, talking to an API using a Redis cache instance. And at no point did I ever configure anything other than the name of those things, the cache name, the API service name, the front end name, right? That's a mind blow, like no connection strings. Like I've never even thought about what the connection string is or where it should be. Everything got taken care of as part of the deployment process. It's kind of mind blowing.
Yes, that is. That is
Does
awesome.
that answer your question though?
Yeah, I believe it does. And so speaking of the API service, what's in it?
Oh yeah, I never did get that far. I got distracted. It just returns a random weather data. It's literally the same code that normally is in a default Blazor app in the actual web page, and then the web front end, it adds a HTTP client using a typed client. So you have this strongly typed get weather method, which calls the backend. This is another existing that I added this years ago when I was still in IC, HTTP client factory. And then this is important actually, and I should have said it. In here, you do say HTTP, like talk to API service. And the string that you put here, this API service is whatever string you put here, right? And then the service discovery system that we built into Aspire takes care of figuring out how to do this for you and all that stuff. I have argued with Fowler before that we should just have an add method that doesn't make you write this, but he kind of likes this. And it's kind of hard to figure out whether you want HTTP or HTTPS without you telling us. And so for now, at least you put this code in, even though technically we could probably figure this out for you for most use cases. We haven't yet got comfortable enough with adding an extension method that just lets you do like this, for example, right? Which would be nicer, but probably a little bit more error prone. So we haven't quite come to terms with doing that yet. That was a good question because I forgot to show that bit.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right, we're caught up on questions.
What else? Oh, cool. Have I finished? Has this failed yet? No. Okay, yeah. So the problem, what happens here is this generates Docker. Yeah, there we go. So unfortunately, this is just the way it is here with the bandwidth that I have. Is it's generating a Docker image from my .NET project, yes, and but building that image, but uploading those layers. My upload is so bad that pushing the Docker image that got created to the registry to be able to push it to Azure Container Apps keeps failing with a timeout. I do have the Azure Container Apps environment. It does have a Redis container running inside of it right now, but unfortunately my app code won't deploy because of my bandwidth stuff. If you want me to come back again and do it again and prove to you that you can deploy it with AZD,
Of course we want you back.
yeah, let me know and I can. But the point is that the AZD, yeah, excellent. Yeah, the point though is that the AZD command, first of all, with the combination of AZD features and .NET features, it means that you don't need to know Docker. You can if you want. It'll produce a Docker image for you. It'll get it into a container apps environment, and it'll do the work to set up all the config to make sure that your stuff works. Yeah.
Okay, we got
Cool.
one more question that just came in.
Go for it.
Okay, so what would you do if you wanted to deploy a service that you wanted to be discoverable by Aspire, but separately used by other containers, for example, or for instance, a common blah API service.
Yeah. So do you want it to spin up locally? So there's a bunch of ways to sort of solve that problem, depending on what you want. One is just don't deploy it on its own, and then inside your app host here, create a reference just with a URL. I don't remember what the actual command for that is. There's a way to add a resource basically, and say like I want a thing that is at this URL endpoint, and just have it kind of flow through the project model. So if you've got it hosted at a particular point. The other would be you could also create your own convenience wrapper methods. If it was a big thing and you had a very big organization, you could have a builder.add blah service, which has whatever information you need to be able to configure the underlying system. Because remember, all these methods, these builder.add Redis and stuff, it is all just creating an object model. It's creating a set of resources with connections to each other, and so you can create your own resource types if you wanted to, and you could, depending on how far you want to go, you go down that path. You could create a Docker container for it, create an image for it that you publish, that you then add a container reference here, so it spins up the container locally, but it is otherwise built and published as part of its own pipeline setup. Or you could add it here as a project because you're running it and you want it to be F5 tier like a normal project, but also have other people like reference it. Depends on how the other people are referencing it, right? You could potentially have it via a Git submodule where it's got its own Git repo, and then everybody else Git submodules it in. There are lots of different ways to try to skin that particular problem. It kind of depends exactly on what your circumstances are. There's a subset of different ways. The easiest is probably, if it's super common, is probably the image way, where you add it as a container reference here, and it has its own build pipeline, right, that generates the Docker images and pushes into a registry, and then everybody who wants to depend upon it can just spin up that container locally, and then they depend upon the one that's already deployed into their environment when they are deployed. And your deployment process will have to take care of, in that world, you probably can't use generic AZD up. You probably have to, but you're probably not in that world anyway, because you're doing some more complex stuff. So you're going to have, bicep files and such doing deployments for you. And in those bicep files is where you would do the connection wire up for what the URLs are and stuff. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question well enough? Or do you have follow-ups?
Oh yeah, he's loving that. So there's a lot of great detail in that response. Thank you.
No problems. We've talked about it a little bit, as you could probably tell, because like the most obvious criticism of Aspire is we kind of push you towards a mono repo, and not everybody likes that. It's not technically required, but all of the data tells me that the vast majority of people in the .NET ecosystem, even people that aren't really doing microservices, don't have hundreds. They have enough that they can just spin them all up locally, and therefore going to the extra step of complexity to split out multiple GitHub repos and doing stuff like that, and having that built into the actual tooling experience of the programming model, it's kind of a step further than I want to go for something where I'm really trying to make this be an accelerator for getting people into cloud native. Because the vast majority of people, as far as the data tells me, don't need all that extra complexity. And the data that I'm referring to is I've surveyed and polled a lot of cloud native developers in the .NET ecosystem, like a lot of people doing microservices in the .NET ecosystem, and the average number of services in production that they had was generally less than 10. Yeah. There are obvious outliers. There are obviously people that have hundreds, but they're going to have, if you've got hundreds of microservices, you've got a lot of problems you need to deal with, and figuring out how to kind of get the Aspire stuff to work is going to be the least of them, I think. Yeah. Other questions?
Yeah, definitely agree.
So
caught up on
I think we have an hour, and I think we're an hour in, right? So is that how long you want to go for? So I guess I'll stop sharing my screen and I can answer more questions, or whatever, or unless you want me to keep going.
Well, let's see if you guys have any other questions. You're more than welcome to ask. And
yeah,
let's see. So much time
that
is
felt like a
saved
pretty
doing the
reasonable
container setup work. Oh yeah, okay. So much time saved doing the container setup work and thinking of learning it as well. So yeah, there's a lot of people appreciating the how well .NET
Yeah.
Aspire is helping.
Yeah. So there's also some sample apps in the Aspire repo that have got Node front ends and stuff like that. So a question that you all haven't asked, maybe because you're all super .NET nerds, in which case I appreciate you all, is how do I put how do I put Vue.js or something in front of this? And the answer is you can have a Node resource in the app host and it will run Node.
Wow. Very cool.
So we know that we need to be polyglot enough to satisfy the extra kind of side projects, side languages that .NET people use. The biggest one is obviously a lot of people have built JavaScript front ends or started doing JavaScript front ends before we built Blazor, and therefore, yeah, Brian, I see you, and therefore we need to make sure that we knew from the very beginning we would have to support at least a couple of other languages in a reasonably first class way. So Node is the first one of those, and there are some samples to show you how to do that.
Right. If there are any links that you can share with us, or I will grab some after the meeting as well, and I'll add them to the YouTube description when I get the video posted. And is there a local story for dependencies like Cosmos, as well as any story for Kafka?
Yeah, so there is a Cosmos. Okay, so this is still recorded. The Cosmos DB has room for emulator has room for improvement, and so you might not be able to use it in all of the places you would like to use it, but one does exist. It actually, we could talk about it more after this probably, but it actually is not really. It's not a fake Cosmos. It like is Cosmos. Is why some of its difficulties exist. But so yeah, there is a set of Cosmos Aspire components to be able to connect to actual Cosmos. There is a Cosmos emulator, so you can do everything I just did with Redis with Cosmos, but the Cosmos emulator has some difficulties sometimes. For example, it doesn't run on Mac Silicon. Which makes it sometimes awkward for a lot of people. And for Kafka, there is not. So it's definitely on the component list. I can't remember if it's in the V1 wave of components. So there will definitely be at some point an Aspire component for Kafka, which is just a which will be much like Redis. It'll be an Aspire component that configures I don't know, probably the Confluent Kafka driver, but one of the drivers, one of the like SDKs to talk to Kafka and put into service and such. And so consuming it, you'll be able to go, what that'll look like is being able to say app.add Kafka, and then build a .add Kafka and it'll spin up the containers for it. And then you'll use DI to inject the Kafka client when you want to consume it then later on. Yeah. Looks like people are putting the sample apps into the chat already. Yeah, the .NET Aspire repo has some samples in it. And there are some docs should appear that actually walk you through how to do JavaScript front ends with .NET backends as well. In particular, that scenario in particular is the most obvious one. Like there's no way we could get away with not putting the ability to put Vue.js and React and stuff in front of a .NET backend. Right. Glad. Was that good? I didn't actually get to watch that yet, Nicholas. I'm glad it was useful for you though. Yeah. But yeah, in the .NET Aurora, they've renamed it away from samples now. I believe they call it Playground. And the reason is that they wanted to be able to put stuff in there that they wouldn't recommend, but is cool. Hence it's called Playground now rather than samples inside the actual Aspire repo. But there will also be more actuals with more samples that are always official guidance also will exist for that scenario specifically. So is Aspire intercepting requests to any registered service like a gateway, or is it strictly tooling to get up and running in a cloud native way quickly? So I think the answer to that question is there is a service discovery system, like a package and library that is built into us that we use in Aspire. It's pluggable, so you can plug like you can plug in like HashiCorp and friends in if you want to use those instead of the default kind of setup that it has. And what it does though is inside it, for example, it injects a HTTP client handler in the HTTP client handler chain to be able to take the names of services that you've used and resolve them to actual URLs using some mechanism, right? And so if you plugged in HashiCorp, it would use console to like resolve said URL. So I guess kinda like I think that's the direction that you're going. Like, so yeah, that exists, and it would exist when you deploy the application to production, and how it like actually does that resolution mechanism depends upon how you want that resolution to set up in your environment. But it is focused on doing that thing that you said at the bottom of your question, which is it still is mostly tooling to get you up and running in a cloud native way as quickly as possible. The problem is that we very quickly came to the realization that we'd been like, I've been arguing with Fowler about whether or not we should have a service discovery for years, right? We finally just came to the conclusion that we have to do something. Aspire was the thing where it became obvious that we had to put something in, because we couldn't rely on it. We couldn't rely on like ephemeral DNS-based service discovery for example, which is, yeah, the argument. One of the strong arguments against actually having an abstraction for service discovery was always that DNS was effectively going to win. Like you wouldn't need to do anything. You could just go HTTP whack service name, and something would have updated DNS records enough to be able to make that work, like in Kubernetes. But Spire made it obvious that we needed something more. So there is some interception happening on that regard. Is that your question? So I'm assuming I didn't misunderstand your question. So at runtime, there is a proxy. When you F5 your app, there is a proxy. So there is if that's the question, sorry. So there is a proxy. There's a thing called the developer control plane. So what Spire does is it builds up that model of what your application looks like. There's a component that ships as part of the SDK, which is we call the developer control plane, and we effectively send our stuff to that developer control plane, and it sets up. It's the thing that takes care of running the containers and stuff, and so on and so forth. And it does use a proxy as part of making sure the traffic all goes to the right places. There's a bunch of detail in that somewhere in our docs. I'll have to find the link. But yeah, there is a proxy when you run locally, but it doesn't go to production. It's a kind of an implementation detail of how the developer control plane orchestrates your app, because we've created what Fowler and I used to call the fake orchestrator, right? Like you've created an orchestrator in practice, but it's not really an orchestrator, because you are all doing all the things that an orchestrator does, but you're not trying to actually solve production problems. You're just doing enough to be able to develop your requirements on your dev machine, which is significantly less than the amount of complexity that you need to actually build a Kubernetes style orchestration system, right? Okay. And so the developer control plane is that for us. Correct. It's Aspire specific, not .NET 8 specific, right? Yep. Yeah. .NET 8 is Aspire is trying to build a thing on top. It's trying to build a stack on top of .NET 8 and push stuff down to .NET 8 as appropriate, without making .NET 8 be about cloud native on its own, right? Because .NET is a big generic platform. It has to support everything, right? But when you have a big generic platform that supports everything, you run the risk very quickly of being effectively beige and kind of useless at everything, right? And so what Aspire is an attempt to do is to maintain all the strengths of what .NET 8 is really good at, evolve .NET 8 as we can, but also provide a kind of tailored custom solution that is built on top to try and solve a whole bunch of pain points that we wouldn't necessarily want to bake into the generic platform that is supposed to be for everything, right? And create some extra layers so that we can put the right pieces in to be able to accelerate stuff without doing things like making it so that every application in the world has to carry the weight of some cloud native thing that they don't care about, for example. We've been constantly trying to figure out that kind of paradox in .NET land, is how do we keep doing things like having MAUIs and having Aspire and stuff like that without, but not making it such that if I'm just building a random ASP.NET Core web app and deploying it to app service, I don't care about any of this, right? So how do you make it pay for play? Has always been a big deal for us. And it gets, it's hard. It takes a lot of architecture. It takes a lot of design and a lot of thought, but we try our best to make it be that way. Interesting that you bring up Java Spring Boot was literally one of the things that we were looking at trying to compete with when we created Aspire. Not like Spring Boot is really kind of just ASP.NET Core, right? But more so the like Spring Boot ecosystem of all of those, like when you go to the Spring Initializer and you're trying to, when you want to create an app and it has all of those lists of things and you can plug them in, and that aspect of Aspire, that Aspire component aspect was directly trying to say, oh, a lot of people really seem to love Spring Boot. What is it that they're actually like getting out of that? And us trying to recreate some of the value that people were getting out of Spring Boot, but not try and copy Spring Boot, because it made no sense to try and copy Spring Boot in .NET because it's not the same. ASP.NET Core was our Spring Boot. Like, yeah. But I'm glad that you love it and that you think Aspire seems way easier, because that was that was the goal, to make it way easier. Yeah, we frequently had a few people, especially people with C something in their title, that would say like, Spring Boot has everything I need. Why would I use .NET? And that was a question that I used to have to answer. Aspire makes it easier for me to answer that.
All right, very cool. Are there any last questions? All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. Everyone, you're more than welcome to stick around. We'll have some discussion after this, but Glenn, thank you so much for talking about .NET Aspire.
No problems. Pleasure to be here. See you all again.